Good morning, everyone. If I can encourage you to get settled, we're going to start the meeting in about a minute. I see that the clerks are still distributing the name tags, so we'll get started in about 1 minute. Thank you very much. So thank you very much. Let's get started. So welcome to the third meeting of the Disabilities Issues Committee. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we will proceed. There is the request for confirmation of minutes from April 28th. Can I have a motion to adopt? Terry Lynn? All in favor? So moved and adopted. Before you, we have an agenda, and we've got several different items. Some items will be held for speakers, but before we do that, we're going to begin with the chair's report. I recognize in many of the other committees at the City of Toronto, the chair's report does not come in the form of written submission. I think that the last time I provided the chair's report, it was actually a long verbalization, and then I was asked to try to summarize some of those points. There's a lot of work that takes place outside of the committees, and I think it's really important that I do try to keep you apprised of some of the business that I'm asked to attend to. So I'm going to succinctly give you some of the high-level notes. I had a meeting with Minister Duguid's office to discuss the implementation of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. I highlighted the concerns of the committee members, especially with respect to some of the discussions that we had about the Parapan Games and the accessibility of the viewing of the sports. And that was conveyed to the minister. Following the last meeting, there was also some discussion offline about the duration of our committee meetings. How long should they actually be? There was some discussion at our first two meetings of the Disabilities Issues Committee that we were going to try to do more and to raise the profile of the good work of the committee as much as possible, but at the same time recognize that the committee has been traditionally meeting for 2 hours. There was some discussion about whether or not we can extend the meeting time. So I think that we will note informally, because we're under informal council proceedings, is that we will try to have a hard stop to the meeting time so that people are not leaving the meeting and missing out on the balance of the conversation, but our hard stop will be 2.5 hours. So you'll have to keep me on track and I'll keep us on track. Is that agreeable? Okay, so we sort of had that offline discussion already. And finally, I have to say that many of you already know that Bernita is leaving us, and today will be her very last Disabilities Issues Committee meeting. And I can honestly say that for the last 6 months, as your new chair, I've had the opportunity to work with Bernita, and I've had the opportunity to learn from Bernita. She, in her role as the consultant in the Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Division, she's been an invaluable resource to myself, as well as, I believe, to the public service. This is a person who embodies much of the spirit of the work that is done by the committee, and her expertise and her compassion and her ability to relay good, complicated technical information in a manner that is accessible to all will be sorely missed. And from time to time, I know that Bernita, not only is she an incredible person that you've all had an opportunity to connect with individually or through the committee over the years, I think that you know that this is more than just a job for her. For her, this is the thing. She wants to do it. This is something that she honestly believes in. And I know that we've been richer at Toronto Public and the Toronto City Hall and the corporation because of her invaluable, insightful, and compassionate contributions. And so whether it's working, I think, through city divisions and trying to get the entire corporate culture to understand what this committee has been advocating for, or, you know, having the ability to invoke and affect citywide, corporation-wide policy change, I think we know in this committee that is no easy task, and Bernita has been able to do all of that. So I am rather sad, because I just got here, and I was hoping to have a long working relationship with Bernita, but she has assured me that she's not going to be far away, and if I need her, we can find a way to get to her. So I know that I will speak on behalf of the committee members, and you have an opportunity to also convey your thoughts and sentiments. But at this point in time, I'd like to thank Bernita for her extraordinary career of public service, and to thank her for her leadership on the issues that really matter and affect Torontonians, making our lives better. So thank you, Bernita. Thank you. So I present the flowers and a card signed by all the committee members to say thank you for the work that you have done on our behalf.
Thank you very much. I'll read this later, if that's okay. I'm just going to move this out of the way so we can proceed with the meeting.
She thinks she's off the hook, but she's not. I would like to turn the microphone and the floor over to Bernita for some comments. I'm sure she's got some things that she would like to share with us as well.
Thank you very much. I didn't expect that Councillor Wong Tam would say such lovely words. I consider it an honor to have served with you all. And some of you I've known for many, many years. Some of you have served on the Disability Issues Committee for more terms than I can think of. I'm looking at Archie, I can see Sam Savona and Mazin as well. And there are many folks around the table that I've known for many, many years. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you. The issues of access, accommodation at the City of Toronto are indeed very, very important to me. And I think the blood, sweat, and tears have already been spent. I think the city's in a much better place at this point. It still continues to be an afterthought sometimes, I won't lie. But I can tell you that many city divisions are head and shoulders above where they used to be. And I'm really proud to be a part of that, and I want to thank you for that. And yes, I can too echo the same sentiment as Councillor Wong Tam. I was so excited to hear that she was going to be the chair of the committee. And I guess one of my regrets is that I don't get to work with you longer. So thank you very much for your card, your sentiments. I'll make sure I do a good read of them a little later on. I don't want to take too much more time of the committee agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernita. And we're all going to engage in a group hug afterwards. This feel-good feeling cannot end right here. Thank you. I don't know if there are members of the committee who would like to offer a few remarks. Yeah, Stephanie? Okay.
Okay.
And you can also say it privately afterwards. But
Oh, okay, yeah.
Stephanie.
I'm very saddened too. I know we've worked for a shorter period of time together, but your commitment, your caring, your leadership, I think we always felt confident because of you being here and involved in these issues, and really going to miss you, and happy retirement.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, Tracy?
And also, I would like to echo that, Bernita. You've been such a tremendous support to the group overall, and the working group that I've been on in particular, with the transportation working group. And I just want to thank you for all the time you spent keeping us out of trouble, even though sometimes I wanted to be in more trouble than I would get into. But I really appreciate your guidance. Thank you.
Terry Lynn, and I think Judy.
Yeah, thanks so much. I always felt really comfortable talking to you about issues, so that was good. And I always felt like I could ask you for guidance, and that you would help me with those kinds of things on the committee, but also personally.
Thank you very much, everyone. And so we're going to proceed with the balance of our agenda. And Bernita, before you're off the hook, you're actually not. You're up next. I actually would like to invite Bernita to speak about the recruitment process as we get ready to open up the proceedings to basically recruit new members and more members and perhaps returning members to this very important committee.
Sorry, tissue. I'm going to speak a little bit about the committee recruitment process. As you know, I guess a couple of meetings ago, I had said that we were going to wait until the application process online would be completely accessible. It is now. However, think about the timing. This is June the 2nd. So in concert with city clerks, we've decided to hold off on the application process until the summer holidays are over. And that means that people would be at home, they're able to concentrate on filling out the application form, et cetera. So when my successor is in place, I'm going to be recommending that the appointment process begin in September. I don't have an actual date for you. All of the organizational documentation will all be prepared beforehand. So basically, at the push of a button, we'll start the application process at that point with a communication strategy, which will largely go out by email, but also through other means, whichever means that we have. I have already collected but a collection of names and email addresses of people who have already expressed interest in applying to the committee. Once again, all the members of the current committee are strongly encouraged to apply again. Please do so. More information will be coming shortly. Hopefully that will address a number of questions that people have had. I continue to receive emails and phone calls of interest. That's really exciting to know that other people want to serve on this committee as well. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Bernita. And I think our office has also collected a list of individuals who have contacted us who are also interested. I suspect that you in your daily workings and activities will also have a wide network to pull from. And we hope to have a very active and robust recruitment process. Our next item up on the agenda is the City of Toronto's Accessibility Design Guidelines 2015. We do have a presentation that will be delivered by staff, in particular Steve Willison, Facilities Management Division, and Joseph Salvaggio, Facilities Management Division of the City of Toronto. And then after the staff presentation, will we be taking speakers. So those who are interested in speaking, if you've not already registered with the clerk, please do so and we'll get you on that list. I'm handing it over to you.
My name is Sunil Sharma. I'm the General Manager of Facilities with the City of Toronto. I'm joined today by Joseph Salvaggio, who is providing program oversight for the accessibility guidelines development for Toronto, the City of Toronto. And also with me is Steve Willison. Steve is responsible for the detailed construction and design aspects of the program as it is developed and the documentation as related to that. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak and provide an update on our progress on this very important program within the City of Toronto. It is something that is very close to us within the Facilities Department, and I'm happy to provide this presentation through our team. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joseph, and he's going to provide an oversight, and then Steve will provide further details of the program.
Okay, so our agenda for today is a brief introduction. You've met all the parties at Facilities Management. We're going to go back and give you a background on AODA just to put the accessibility guidelines in context. and then we'll give you an update on the guidelines themselves as to where we are at currently today, and then we'll open the discussion up for any Q&A. At this point, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Stephen Willison, and he'll take us into the Aoda background.
Thanks, Joseph. First, I wanted to make a sort of very brief overview of the Aoda, consequent council commitment that was made for accessibility in 2009, and also how the Aoda and other legislation and standards relates to the existing Toronto accessibility guidelines from 2004 and the upcoming revised guidelines to be released later this year. So the Aoda legislation was passed back in 2005, mainly because the province needed strong legislation to develop, implement and enforce standards of accessibility, not just for the public sector, but also for the private sector as well. And the main requirement is that all barriers be removed, preventing people with disabilities from participating in normal daily activities. And of course, the ultimate goal of the legislation is that the province will become fully accessible by 2025. So another important fact is, of course, that the Aoda definition of disability is exactly the same as the Ontario Human Rights Code. And it's based on the principles of inclusive design, not just disabilities, but for all members of the public, including people with disabilities. So it's about inclusivity rather than specifically certain groups. So following the Aoda, City Council made a commitment in 2009 to establish policies, practices and procedures that are consistent with the Aoda, again with the same ultimate goal of the city becoming fully accessible by 2025. If you look at the commitment there, that the highlighted section is really the important section about establishing standards which are consistent with the Aoda. So currently, Aoda has 5 standards, as you know, which have slowly become law since 2008. The first was customer service standard back in 2008. Following that was the integrated accessibility standards, which included information and communication, employment, and transportation. Then finally, the 5th standard, which really relates most to the City of Toronto accessibility guidelines, is the built environment standard. And that's actually been split into 2 parts. The first part being design of public spaces, which I'll go into later. Second part being the building code accessibility requirements. So starting off with the design of public spaces, this applies to new and renovated spaces. Usually they're outside the property line, they're in the public realm, and they include areas like, for instance, recreational trails and parks, play spaces, public roads and sidewalks, and public parking spaces. Second part is the building code accessibility requirements, and as the name says, it's really that part of the built environment that's also incorporated in the current Ontario Building Code 2012 and the accessibility amendments that came into force January 1st this year. And again, it applies to new buildings and major renovations. And the important thing is that's clearly defined in the 2012 Ontario Building Code. And again, as examples, what that relates to is the approach and entry to buildings, usually inside the property line. So when you enter the building, communication spaces, circulation, elevators, washrooms, and all interior spaces. So, the important issue is the approach to the building, a fully accessible route to any area within that building. And so the current situation that we have to deal with is it's a little bit messy because we have to ask our design consultants and staff to take into consideration 4 separate documents, that being the Ontario Building Code, AO Design of Public Spaces, the Building Code accessibility requirements, and also the existing City of Toronto accessibility guidelines, which was published in 2004. So, you know, it's a rather difficult kind of situation when you ask your consultant to look at 4 different documents and determine the optimum requirements for accessibility from that. Another important thing, when we look back at the 2004 accessibility guidelines, is to realize that one of the major goals was to demonstrate that the city has a proactive commitment to higher levels of accessibility which go beyond legislation and create a best practices, which is not just applicable to the city, but as we know, has been used by you know, many other municipalities, many other public and private sector organizations as an example of a high standard of accessibility. So now that the AODA is in place, we have a new Ontario Building Code with an accessibility amendment. It was very important to take the existing accessibility guidelines and revise it to represent the highest standards of accessibility today, and also take into consideration standards that other municipalities have put into place. So really, we're looking at an evolving document that takes into consideration new standards, new laws, and continually revisits what is the best practice and what is applicable to the current situation. So once again, the proposed intention of the new accessibility guidelines is to provide one reference point, as well as the building code, for consultants and staff to establish a best practices threshold. If you look at the diagram, essentially we have 4 separate boxes which contribute to this one document, which is a best practices threshold. And the challenge is to develop a guideline that's applicable to the, as you know, most of our properties are actually existing buildings. They're not new buildings, they're being renovated over a period of time. And the challenge is to create a guideline which can not only apply to brand new buildings, but renovations and limitations of the existing buildings that we already have. And if you look at the 4 bottom boxes, what you're looking at is national CSA standards, Ontario Building Code 2012, the AODA Public Spaces Building Code Accessibility Requirements, and other best practices documents that we wanted to take into consideration in this. So next slide shows a matrix of these different documents. For every requirement that we had in the existing accessibility guidelines, we wanted to compare these documents side by side and highlight in yellow, this is just one page out of about 50, of what is the optimum standard for each of those requirements. So since mid-2014, we retained a consultant, a design consultant, specializing in accessibility, along with a technical stakeholder committee, which was comprised of internal city divisions and external groups, such as Canadian Institute for the Blind, for instance, to look at all these requirements and develop an optimum standard applicable to each of the requirements of the existing Toronto accessibility guidelines. Next slide shows the 4 documents main documents that we compared at the top, but then there's a very extensive list of additional reference documents. I'm not going to read through them all, but Examples might be the Toronto Vibrant Streets, the construction standards, and other municipal standards. For instance, London and Oakville have very strong standards in terms of accessibility. And these are what we wanted to take into consideration. At this point, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Joseph, who will look at more of the milestones, future steps, and progress that's being made this year towards the final 2015 revised accessibility guidelines.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so this slide provides an overview of the overall milestone schedule to update the accessibility guidelines and take them to Council for approval. As you can see from the blue bar, we are currently at the 50% draft stage and progressing towards 75 to 90% draft by the end of summer 2015. The goal is to be ready to release the guidelines by early 2016 or sooner, and then institute staff training throughout the divisions in order to explain how the guidelines should be implemented. There will be many stages of review and feedback to get there, primarily from our stakeholder committee. This slide shows a list of our stakeholders currently involved in the project, as well as new stakeholders who will be brought in to participate in the 75% to 90% stages indicated in the red text. As you can see, we have a very large group of stakeholders, which include private citizen and nonprofit stakeholders, such as Canadian National Institute for the Blind, as Steve mentioned earlier, as well as we have city board and agencies at the table. Represented, some examples are TTC and Waterfront Toronto. And we have over 16 internal divisions represented at the table, with Parks and Recreation as one example, and Transportation Services, and some of the additional divisions who will be brought in, who are indicated in red on the right. Of course, Council and Committee stakeholders include the Disabilities Issues Committee, our interdivisional staff team on equity and diversity, and our Customer Service Steering Committee. The overall project of updating the Toronto Accessibility Guidelines is sponsored by Equity, Diversity and Human Rights Division, the Corporate Chief Officer, and the City Manager's Office, with Facilities Management taking the lead on the implementation of the project. Can we go back one slide? Our consultant is Accessibility Advantage. They've been procured last year, and they have over 10 years of experience working on accessibility issues in the industry, and they've worked with other municipality and provincial organizations as well. As we all know, AODA is not limited in its application and influences in many aspects of our built environment. This slide shows a timeline view of some of the other AODA initiatives currently underway within the Facilities Management Organization over the next 10 years. As you can see, the top bar indicates the accessibility guidelines being implemented in 2016 and then also spanning across to 2025, recognizing that the document is a living document and is always up for interpretation and additional edits. Further developments underway with facilities management will include staff training on the accessibility guidelines, and then the broken arrows progress towards 2025 to indicate ongoing staff training as new city staff join our organization. We also have an initiative which underway currently with the 5-year signage and wayfinding work plan. This encompasses upgrading the signage and wayfinding in all our civic centers at City Hall and Metro Hall, and we'll have to look at influences of ADA for high contrasting signage and also the use of electronic signage as well. We have currently a customer service counter strategy that's in place and is underway, and there will be influences of this in the guidelines, perhaps in the form of diagrams that will clarify not only within our major corporate facilities, but also to aid other divisions on how to deal with customer service counters and how they address accessibility issues. And then overall, the bottom arrow indicates our physical implementation of renovations and upgrades to our capital portfolio, and this applies to other divisions throughout the city. As you can see, we have an approach of auditing and designing and implementing this. and it's all integrated and overlapping. So here are some of our next steps as we progress towards our 75% and 90% milestones. Most items that are listed are aimed at making the document more concise and easier to read. We also start to develop a renovation compliance criteria, which will address situations, as Steve mentioned earlier, to deal with restrictive portfolio buildings, such as our heritage buildings and our buildings that are on tight urban sites where it may not be possible to move ahead with some of the recommendations. Recognizing that there are many codes and standards driving the guidelines, we will also include reference tables and diagrams for situations common to city buildings, such as service counters, as I discussed earlier. Our future goals and priorities will be to establish the Toronto Accessibility Compliance and Enforcement Strategy to ensure the city divisions are implementing the guidelines on future new construction and major renovation projects. As we talked about earlier, it's an adaptable document, it's a living document, and we want to ensure that it is addressing the needs of all divisions and all citizens. As I'm sure you can appreciate, updating the Toronto Accessibility Guidelines comes with some challenges, which face us today and some which will face us in the future. Currently, these include establishing a best practice threshold which meets the needs of all Torontonians. Trying to find the right balance and getting consensus from our stakeholders will be essential to our success. Looking ahead, we will also have to anticipate and plan for future funding requirements over the next 10 years and establish a sustainable fiscal plan which won't overburden the city's capital budget on improvements required to our facilities. We will need to work together with all divisions, but most notably the Equity and Diversity and Human Rights Division, to ensure that our measurement and compliance tools support the city's overall accessibility plan. And most recently passed by Council in March of 2015, we are looking ahead now at aligning the city's municipal bylaws and procedures and policies with AODA and perhaps even the Toronto Accessibility Standards. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you today about the Toronto Accessibility Standards, and we look forward to coming back again and giving you an update in the fall or later in the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we open the opportunity for questions from the committee, we are going to take speakers from the audience, so don't stray too far. We're going to have you back shortly. I'm just going to call for speakers on this particular item. And the first speaker I have registered is Miroslav Glasvik. Miroslav, are you speaking to the item? Okay, we're just going to have to switch seats for a bit. And then I understand there's another gentleman. Can you please let the clerk know that you're interested in speaking? Okay, Miroslav, you have 5 minutes. The clock is to your left. Please begin.
My last name is Glavic, just so you know.
Thank you for the correction.
One of the things I haven't seen is the city dealing with hard of hearing people. I am hard of hearing. There's a difference between hard of hearing and deaf. I don't know sign language. The only sign language I know is a one finger, if you all catch my drift. The same thing as people with visual disabilities don't know, most of them don't know Braille. You know, when you go on the subway, those little bumps, and we don't know. My hearing is going to go down the toilet. It runs, my father has, and my grandpa runs in the family. I'm trying to learn. I try to learn sign language. I don't know it. One issue that I had about 10 years ago when I went to get a permit down in this building, and it happens to Ttc as well. Some people think it's getting close to the person and raising your voice is going to make me be able to hear you better. One of the things I do many times, I have my cell phone. I can type it and show you on the screen. If you're speaking to me, you can do your cell phone or pen and piece of paper. A lot of that, hard of hearing on the whole disability spectrum, hard of hearing. It's is at the bottom of the scale of anybody caring in society. Not every disability is visual, as everybody in this room should know. When I use a wonderful public transit system, I don't know if any of you take it, has a stop announcement. I can't hear it no matter what, especially when I came here in rush hour. People of hard of hearing are no different than any of you, and we should all be treated equally. At some point in history, we all been discriminated on gender, sexual orientation, color of skin. The same thing with hard of hearing people. We shouldn't. There should be a training on with staff, every single staff member at City Hall, Queens Park, everybody. Your up and down is a way for me to know my voice is not, it's high enough that you can hear me. So if any of you could bring a motion or whatever to put this part of training, especially somewhere in the line that says, don't get close to a person and start yelling at them. It's not just degrading, That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Are there any questions to our speaker? If not, there is another speaker. I think there's two more, actually, on the item. Our next speaker is Gerald Parker. Gerald, if you can come to the front of the room, I'm going to restart your time.
Good morning, members of council and members of committee. Thank you for hearing me at the last moment on this item, because it's a very important one. I want to, first of all, say to our colleagues over at the City of Toronto, you did a great job. You really have. There are some information and additional input that's come in regards to some of the communications considerations as well as financial applications that need to be made more robust and resourced accordingly that will help folks get through this process. But you've done a great job. What I will say with that being said is I always remember very clearly a statement of the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Italian government at the Helios project, which was the European Commission's guidelines process that I was invited to be involved in as a former president of Beyond Ability International. And he said this: we have the very best accessibility guidelines and laws in all of Europe. We just don't enforce them. And as the AODA legislative review by now Provost Moran very clearly said, is that we're at a watershed moment at 2015, 10 years away from 2025, and we have to recognize that the enforcement of the guidelines or the AODA itself, and even the positioning and engagement of the accessibility committees to such ends, is lacking. So again, I make the statement, we can have the best standards in all of the world. If we're not going to enforce them, they mean nothing. And that is very much the case in the City of Toronto. I say this with the greatest amount of respect to everybody, and Bernita, I wish you very well. We've known each other a long time, and I know how tough your job is. As a former accessibility coordinator, I know it. It's very difficult, and it's very important of your interdepartmental collaborations with good and smart people like these colleagues to my left and to your right, accordingly from the planning department. Good people doing good things. Your legacy will live on. It just needs to be implemented. So I will make these additional points. The connection between the built environment, the building code, the planning department and the building department and the Planning Act, two cultures, two pieces of legislation and typically are at odds with each other, not only in the process and timing of the process, but also in how they see things. Bricks and mortar, sidewalks and other things. And it doesn't matter how accessible your building is or how accessible or well-trained your staff are if they can't get to it. Public transit being an example, accessible cabs being another. So we have to resolve these disconnects, not only in public policy, but as the result is in public safety. We need to retrofit, and I very much appreciate that point, because we are a built city, and there cannot be any more new excuses for new barriers. So the retrofit for optimum result is really, really important. Timing is everything. It really, really, really is. The planning department has to be out front on these things. This committee has to be out front of the planning department in these things, and how you're positioned as a committee within that process is very, very important. Oakville is a great example. I'm very proud to have that example put forward here because we did a lot of their work. London, not so much. Be very, very careful. London is one of those places that says one thing and does something completely different. I can assure you of that, having now them second at the top of the list for municipal failure for enforcement. They do not even respect Regulation 581 of the Highway Traffic Act that governs the charter and human rights provisions and public safety provisions of accessible parking, much like the Toronto Police Services. Well done on the stakeholder inclusion. Smart people surround themselves with people that are going to tell them what you need to hear as opposed to what you want to hear. That's very important. Having an accessibility committee to do that is also very important. Changing that operational hearts and mind is at the core of this entire exercise. Legislation or guidelines don't change minds, they just constrain the heartless. And in this process, as Bernita perhaps can attest, and I can, and many around this room, it's a very difficult and tough job to do, convincing others of a reality that they just simply do not get.
Ms. Parker, your final thoughts?
Yes, thank you. So the interdepartmental cooperation is very important. Manifestations like, as the case was when I came to Toronto Police College last year, 25 years after we sat on the committee together, that not having accessible parking signs is a real affront.
And your time is up.
Yeah, no new barriers, no more excuses, great collaboration, and remember, if you have the greatest standards and guidelines in the world, implement them, enforce them, and give them teeth, and not let's have the tail wagging the dog anymore. Thank you. Great job, seriously.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We also have another speaker, Emily. We're going to have to just move the chair for Emily. Yeah, thank you very much. Emily Daigle. Is the microphone on for Emily? We're about to, let's see if it,
Good morning, everyone. Now you see one of the inaccessible items in City Hall, these microphones. But I digress. Excellent report, excellent work on the report, but you missed one vital aspect of society and people with disabilities in the city, and something that I've fought for the past year. My husband and I, both legally blind, I'm in a wheelchair, technically learning disabled. My husband's slightly physically disabled. We're homeless for 8 months. My hometown, there was nowhere for us to go, no homeless shelters. They wanted to split us up. So I came back home to Toronto since we'd been out east, living in Halifax. Came back to Toronto. Our lives were put in danger by one individual at the family res shelter on Kingston Road. I'd spent 3 days, total of about 8 hours on the phone with Central Intake. They want us to split us up. I said, no, we're fully dependent on each other. I can't survive without him and he can't survive without me. Simple. When we got into family res, we were there close to 5 months. There's no accessibility. I destroyed my old wheelchair because I had to store it in a room where we were staying that had barely any heat. We fought for heat. We went through discrimination by workers constantly. We were treated like children by staff. And it got to the point where my wheelchair was breaking because it froze. and thawed and froze and thawed because it was parked near the outside door of the room we were staying in. The only place I could put it where there was a gap about 2 inches wide. I let in the snow and the rain, and staff had to be begged, and I learned how to turn on our heat after it kept failing. They put a tamper-proof box around the heat register. The counter at the kitchen we were supposed to cook in was not accessible. The doorways had bumps 1.5 inches high at times and very narrow. How safe is it for a visually impaired person to be carrying a scalding pot of food through 3 doors, with large bumps with narrow passageways, as well as being legally blind? Would you want to do it? I ended up having to go to the city ombudsman to get any help whatsoever. And all they've done is slap a few buttons on the shelter doors that usually don't work. The staff attitude hasn't changed. There's no accessible formats in any of the documents they give you. No staff training. It was so traumatic that we were sent out in the cold February 8th of 2013, -30 wind chill, if you may remember, by a staff member not giving us properly visually impaired direction that would help us get to the Lido Motel in the dark with tons of snow on the ground. Thank God for a TTC bus driver, because he called his control to put him out of service so he could drive us directly to the front door of the Lido Motel. I tried to accommodate that driver. I'll never forget the bus number, 7588 on the 86 Scarborough. I don't know his name. I never got confirmation that he was commended, but he saved 2 severely disabled persons' lives that night. And people ask me why I'm angry with this city. People ask me why I've partially given up and not fight anymore. I've been advocating for disabled for 25 years, just over that now. I've been on committees like this in my hometown of Hamilton, Ontario. I was on the early committees for AODA. You guys say CNIB does a lot? No, they do nothing for people like me. They don't help us with jobs. They don't help us with accessibility. They won't even help us get accessible resources for a city living in a city shelter. So there's a vast aspect you've forgotten in this report, and that is the homeless, the people who are at the bottom of the rung for housing, the people who are begging to get somewhere to live that's safe, doesn't break a $20,000 wheelchair that ODSP have now, as of yesterday, as of yesterday, have cut funding in half for. I'm sitting in a brand new wheelchair, and I fought for over a year for this chair. No thanks to the city. I just want to tell you that if you think you're reaching everywhere with this report, and if you think you're covering even 80% of the issues in this city for accessibility, you're not. We have elevators in this building that were out for weeks and may still be out of service. I avoid that elevator now. You have trains that are 1 inch to 2 inches high above the platforms, plus a gap that breaks wheelchairs. I just want to thank Kristen Wong-Tam because she's an inspiration for me and many disabled women. And I want to thank also the committee that have worked very hard on this. I'm sorry to bring you down a few pegs, but let's put it this way. When you're legally blind, in a wheelchair, hearing impaired, what do? We were denied the accessible room at this shelter, well, what they called accessible, 17 times while we were in this shelter because staff didn't want to deal with us. I just would like to say thank you to those who have worked very hard.
Emily, thank you very much for your deputation. It's Kristen again. Are there any questions from the committee for Emily? Terry Lynn?
I'm just wondering if there's like an action item that you can identify or something that you think would be really helpful in a preventative way in the future.
The biggest thing, if you've got a disabled person that has to travel 1.5 hours each way from Scarborough just to eat, and a couple who get attacked on the SRT because they're disabled, and bus drivers that pull tricks to avoid wheelchairs, deal with it. Don't make us have to fight our way and beg Fiona Crean for help. We're losing her in November, and I'll tell you this now, we're losing a huge champion for the disabled.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Emily, thank you very much. Thank you. I will ask city staff to come back to the front of the room. We probably have some questions for you after your presentation. Emily, thank you. So coming back to the city staff's report on the upgraded or the updated or soon to be updated Toronto accessibility guidelines, I recognize that this is a body of this is a guideline that the city had originally incorporated and adopted in 2004. The staff have identified it as a living report, quote unquote, and they expect it to evolve. I think that we all hope that it would evolve. There were deputants that spoke today that talked about the actual enforcement of this. How do you actually execute? I suspect there are members of the committee who may have some questions regarding all that was presented today. Yin, I see you. Please go ahead.
Thanks again, Steve and Joseph, for updating us on this. I do wonder, though, if we are interested in reading the details of the specifics, standards and guidelines. I understand you've mentioned CNIB being present. However, I was one of them, and I do know that sometimes, not all the meetings, I don't know, that someone from the blind and partially sighted community. So it is to our interest, the blind and partially sighted, to really look at how information and communication accessibility is being put in there. And you mentioned wayfinding, and that is a specific interest of mine. So if I were to wanting to look at some of the specific standards before it's all approved, and is there any way to get at them?
Through the chair, I'm going to refer that question to Joseph to give an overview of the type of documents that we would be able to share.
Yes, so currently our documents are in draft, and they have been requested through the Equity and Diversity Division. I think there's a central number that staff and public are allowed to contact, and then we meet with the people or email them the draft documentation. The committee is also growing. Some organizations have expressed interest to join in and participate in providing feedback. And at some point, when we get to a stage of 90%, we will reach out to the public and make the concise, consolidated document available for review. Currently, right now, the document exists in text and graphic format, and the 75% stage will be merging the two documents and dealing with the graphics and all the accessibility features that the document must have. So as we move forward, absolutely, the document can be made available, and we have to all recognize it is a draft document, and feedback is welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And a question from Stephanie.
And touching it.
No, don't touch that.
Thanks for the comment. I would say for deaf and hard of hearing population, and I think someone who presented earlier whose name escapes me. My question is, the guidelines have things in there for access for hearing and deaf people. So, for example, meeting rooms, are they FM? Do they have FM capability? At service desks, will there be things like counter loops or UB duos or that sort of thing?
Through the chair, Steve, could you provide a little bit of oversight on those aspects?
Yeah, actually, following the previous presentation on being hard of hearing or legally deaf, as I understand it, when we look at our future signage initiative, which will include accommodation and design for people of all disabilities, there are in fact initiatives there to for passive treatment. As an example, when you walk through a corridor on a hard floor surface, the acoustic effect is different than moving on a carpet. And so, you know, one of the important aspects of future design is not just FM loops with signage, but is also how you design the environment. So when someone is going into a room, it's important that they can be able to detect the different acoustic sense moving from one space to the other, and this will be a help to guide them through the building, as well as active systems like FM loops on signage systems. So these will be addressed in the new document, but I think probably in more detail in the city's future initiatives regarding the signage program.
Another question?
It's Stephanie again. I just wanted to clarify too, I'm also speaking to the service counters. When people come and action is often a huge barrier that could assist.
As opposed to A, do you have the capacity to execute and to ensure that the construction and the accreditation requirements are made within a 10-year period?
What I would say is that we are building our capacity to deliver this service. It's a fine balance of getting the funding and the resources in place. The group is highly motivated to get traction by making sure that the funding and the resources are brought to bear. To that effect, we're working closely with the DC office, the financial support, to align those resources and funds.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to bring it into the committee for comments then. I know that Monica wanted to speak, and then Terry Lynn to the item. Monica first.
I'm just, we hear all this, that it's budgets and everything else, and we understand that. Is there a way, this ends up being more of a question than a comment now, is there a way to consider something like sponsorship or you know, getting building companies involved, Home Depot, Mike Holmes, for Pete's sake, anybody, to bring this to the forefront, to get money into the coffers, because quite frankly, we can't wait anymore. It's an embarrassment as to how we treat the most vulnerable levels of society, and it really needs to stop. It's becoming more and more apparent that nobody cares, and it's going to be like everything else in this city. Until somebody dies, nobody's going to react, and I don't want it to go there. Thank you.
Monica, thank you. Terry Lynn?
I have been in touch with the city in regards to the centralized access for supportive housing. And I know that they are currently working on like collaborative projects so that people with multiple disabilities can actually have like safe, affordable, accessible housing. But I just wanted to say here today that if there are meetings in regards to that, because I've been in touch with city staff about that previously, that I'd like to throw my hat in the ring to help with those projects as well.
And we would welcome that.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other speakers to the item? Okay. I'll just speak very quickly to it, and I recognize that we've taken some time. I also know that this was a very important item that the committee was waiting for an update. I recognize that the City of Toronto has led the process with accessibility by making sure guidelines were in place early on and before the adoption of the AODA. However, I think that there is room for improvement, and I would say the room for improvement is not just a little bit of room for improvement, but a sizable amount of space is available for improvement. The frustration I think that I sense from the committee members is the disconnection between the policy adoption to the execution and implementation of policy, and of course, public awareness and education. As I see the province struggle to ensure that the AODA is actually a legislation that's going to be enforced, the City of Toronto can't necessarily be 10 years ahead in advancing accessibility and then still be right behind the province with respect to execution, which means that Council, City Council must adhere to its own policy and put the force and weight of council and the political strength and might of council to ensure that if the City of Toronto is going to be the model employer for the city and for all other orders of government, then we have to lead the way by ensuring that all our facilities, all our services are going to be fully accessible to all Torontonians, regardless of ability and disability, which means that city councillors who are here and sitting on the committee will have to be more vocal. It will mean that if we are going to, our next presentation is actually from the Ttc, and they're going to probably tell us what we already know, is that they're not going to be able to come into compliance. If we're going to force our agencies to think about accessibility and to live and breathe accessibility in terms of service provision, then we must lead. And so with that, I will move to adopt the report and thank staff for the work that they've done, but also the work that they will do with more vigor and more passion as they move forward. All in favor of receiving the report? Okay, so received. Thank you very much, staff. Our next item coming up will be the 2015 Accessibility Plan Status Report. And of course, this is the report that we've been highly anticipating from the Toronto Transit Commission. Yeah, okay, thank you. We've allocated about 10 to 12 minutes for your report and then an opportunity for deputations and speakers. Okay?
All right, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Matt Haig, and I'm a Senior Accessibility Planner at the TTC. And so I'm here at the request of the committee to briefly go for our 2015 Accessibility Plan Status Report. And I know there's a time constraint, so this won't take more than about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. So for some background, our most recent multi-year accessibility plan under the AODA covers the years 2014 to 2018, and this committee received that report last year. So the report I'll now be talking about is the annual report also required by the AODA standards, and so that's our 2015 update on the goals and the objectives that we outlined in the 2014 multi-year plan. So the multi-year plan outlined 41 different objectives relating to improving the accessibility of TTC services and facilities over the 5-year period from 2014 to 2018. And these are in 4 broad areas. They're in stations and facilities, vehicles, Wheel-Trans services, and also customer service. Many of the 41 objectives I mentioned had a specific year targeted for completion. For example, in 2014, there were 19 objectives targeted for that year. Of those, 17 were completed on schedule, while 2 objectives slipped a bit and were completed in early 2015. The remaining 22 objectives are in progress, and we do expect to complete those by 2018. So I'll briefly go over some of the objectives that we committed to for 2014 in each of the 4 areas previously mentioned. For stations and facilities, we reviewed our design standards and implemented changes based on some of the new AODA requirements that Steve and Joseph were talking about previously. And we also opened 2 more accessible subway stations, Dufferin and Lawrence West. Those both opened in November and December last year. We were not able to open 2 new accessible entrances at Queen's Park and Shepherd Yonge in 2014 as planned, but those did open by February of this year. So those are both now open for use by customers. For vehicles, we launched the first accessible streetcar on our 510 Spadina streetcar route in 2014. That was on August 31st. And we also reviewed all of our close to 10,000 bus stops to determine which inaccessible ones could be made accessible in the future. Now, that's not to say we've gone and made all those accessible right away, but we've gone and looked at them, and now we're making a work plan to determine what's the best way to go and make these accessible going forward. For our Toronto Rocket subway trains, we've begun to install external door chimes at all the train doors. And this was in response to some feedback from customers and from our Ttc Accessibility Committee, ACAT. And we've also begun to install, and actually finished installing, improved intercar barriers, or you might know them as the bungee cords, the red bungee cords in between all the train cars. And we added an additional one of these to improve safety for customers with vision impairments. For Wheel-Trans, in 2014, we increased the number of reservation staff to answer calls. We hired 7 new people to do that. And we also took measures to reduce the number of no-shows for eligibility assessment interviews. Finally, the much-anticipated upgrade to the Wheel-Trans website to allow customers to add their own new addresses online was implemented. And we've had lots of good feedback on that. There were several customer service initiatives that we committed to for 2014. We installed new priority seating decals on all TTC vehicles in compliance with the AODA. And we also launched a new public education campaign and introduced new blue priority seating in these areas. The blue seats are in place on many of our vehicles, but it's still in progress, and we do expect to complete that over the next year. We also started to introduce new wayfinding signage in some of our subway stations. You might have seen these at Bloor Yonge and St. George, featuring the large new colorful line numbers, but also more signs pointing the way to elevators and other accessible routes. And based on the feedback we received, we will be going forward with implementing these signs at other stations. Union Station is another where, with the recent renovations, it will have the new signage throughout when it's complete. We've installed over 60 new customer information screens in our subway stations as planned. And the good thing about these screens is they allow us to put visual notices of delays and detours, which were previously only available in audio form. And we've also upgraded the public address system as part of an ongoing program in 20 subway stations to make announcements easier to hear and understand. So that's the objectives we completed in 2014. As mentioned, we do have 22 more objectives planned for 2015 to 2018, and I'll give you a brief summary of some of the more major planned initiatives. We plan to complete easier access accessibility upgrades, including elevators at 9 additional stations. Right now, 4 of those stations are under construction. That's Coxwell, Woodbine, Ossington, and St. Clair West. We will be implementing a real-time elevator and escalator monitoring system, and the idea here is that will reduce downtime from unplanned outages, because now we will know immediately whenever an elevator or escalator stops functioning, instead of waiting for somebody to have to report that to us. We will be installing external route announcements on all our vehicles. If anyone has taken one of the new low-floor streetcars, you might have heard the streetcar talks to you on the outside. It tells you what the route is. This will be coming to our buses starting later this year, and it will roll out across all the buses by the end of 2016, and we plan to install these on our subway trains as well. We will be revising the Wheel-Trans eligibility criteria, which is a requirement of the AODA standards. I'm sure the committee will ask about that, but unfortunately I don't have any details at this time. We're just in the planning phases of that, but I can assure you there will be extensive consultation with Wheel-Trans customers and the public about any changes to the eligibility criteria. And finally, we plan to make the Presto fare card system. We want to ensure it's fully accessible for every customer when it's rolled out in our stations. We do have several new initiatives for 2015 that we didn't have originally in our multi-year plan. One of those, I think I heard it mentioned earlier, was the gap between the subway trains and the platform. So at Eglinton Station, I just have a couple images on the screen. About 2 weeks ago, we fixed part of the subway platform in Eglinton to raise the edge of the subway platform. And on screen, there's 2 photos that shows a before and after. And the after picture, it clearly shows there's hardly any vertical gap anymore between the train and the platform. And here's another more close-up of the same photos showing that it should be much easier to board the trains. So if anybody's interested in looking at this, it's at the south end of Eglinton Station, right beside the elevator. And that's on the southbound side. We do actually plan to do the northbound side this weekend, actually. Also in 2014, we created new travel training materials. These are available on our website or by calling customer service, or if anybody wants to leave me their contact information, I can get those out to you. And on screen is the cover of that handbook, and there's also a PowerPoint presentation that complements the handbook for any organizations that might wish to train their clients using the book. We also improved our accessibility training for TTC staff last year. And on screen is just an image of our booklet that we are distributing to all staff called Helping Customers with Disabilities. And we also worked on standardizing our streetcar platform design. This is a design that has ample room for customers who use mobility devices, but also safety features for customers with vision impairments, such as we're now going to be adding truncated dome tactile walking indicators at the ramped end of the platform, so you know when you're exiting and you've reached the street. So that's it for my presentation today. Thanks again to the committee and Madam Chair for having me here, and I'll be happy to take any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you very much, Matt. We do have some speakers on this item, but don't stray too far because we will have you back to answer questions. Can I please have Nick Grande come to the front of the room? You will have 5 minutes to speak. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you.
Be mindful of the clock on your left.
Yep. Madam Chair, other members of council, and the members of the Disability Issues Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about my perspective regarding this important report before you and presented by the Toronto Transit Commission as part of its overall 5-year plan on accessibility. Progress has been made by the TTC is very commendable. Under the leadership of the Commission and Andy Byford, much can be said for the accomplishments made around accessibility. But I think we can also agree there's much work still to do, and we at MV1 Canada see ourselves as part of a solution, a made-in-Toronto solution that accelerates steps towards improving accessibility in the city. I note that the Commission itself wanted to improve performance standards to further advance telephone trip bookings. Our advice relates to that specific item as well. Telephone trip bookings are a function of the need of users to access their services most readily and efficiently. We note that these services offered to those eligible require capacity to deliver the services. I've heard anecdotally that there are many people that cannot readily access services exactly when they need them, and this means that there can be many disappointed people, and the bookings and timings don't allow for the necessary flexibility to provide this service. While a significant number of people are served, we believe with the right type of vehicle, the City of Toronto will be better served rather than the type of current vehicles that form the core of the current Wheel-Trans service, along with private sector services provided by our taxi companies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the passion that I have about a certain of a product, the MV1. I helped conceive this product many, many years ago with a former TTC staffer, actually a superintendent. Many of you might have been around and worked with Bob Thacker. This vehicle, the intention of designing this new type of vehicle was to actually service all accessible needs. And as Mr. Parker pointed out, when we build out our environment, if we can't get there, it's not truly accessible. I'm not trying to sell a vehicle. I'm trying to make everyone understand this is the reason that I get up in the morning. I do these types of presentations across the country, but this is the city in which I live. I do many things to make a living, and this is just one of them. My job is to create the culture of accessibility. And this was one of my first projects to design a vehicle specifically for the needs of people who use wheelchairs and the family caregivers alike. My point is, universal design is the next terminology that I believe we all, to build the culture of accessibility, we need to understand that everything has to be universally designed. It's not a vehicle for one type of customer. It's vehicles and the family of services that we provide for everybody. Aftermarket changes to different vehicles and change its structural integrity, and through second stage manufacturing, the standards that are set by Transport Canada are lowered after vehicles are modified. We believe that, again, through universal design, things need to be the forethought, not the afterthought. And this type of vehicle, again, the MV1, meets all standards of the Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standards and was built for one purpose and one purpose only. And we deserve this. Our confidence in universal design offers a better reliability, a longer vehicle life, enhanced safety, and most importantly, a peace of mind. Now let's literally park, no pun, of every pun intended, the MV1, and focus on how this relates to our documents today. First off, I want to issue a challenge to everybody. I've done this with a few councillors that I've met over the years, mainly here in Toronto. We have a certain type of bus that works for the TTC. It's called the Ford Elf. And I notice, and this is my challenge, is if we pay attention to watching these buses roll across our city, I believe there's 206 of them. Generally speaking, they roll around quite empty. They're not optimized or used in an optimum capacity, and the average ride is less than 1.7 passengers in wheelchairs per day.
Mr. Grande, you have 20 seconds left.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, I'm going to give you just a quick anecdote then. There was a basketball event at Variety Village. 14 athletes came out. 13 of these buses pulled up to pick 13 of the athletes up individually. And I find that we are continuously burdening our city with some costs and obviously traffic and congestion in regards to these oversized buses. And I believe that we do have a potential to do a better job with a more nimble fleet and actually provide what is 100% equal access services instead of having distinguished between a Wheel-Trans bus and a not Wheel-Trans bus. I think we are past that as a society, and I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to speak today and to point out some of the virtues of the vehicles that we choose to use today in our city.
Okay, thank you very much. I was hoping that you were going to make a connection back to the report that was just delivered regarding TTC accessibility.
Yeah.
You were good, but I hope that when you appear before us next time,
Yes.
is to really speak specifically to the item. I did sort of allow for some latitude. Are there any members of the committee who are interested in asking questions about MV1? No? Or TTC accessibility to the speaker? Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Miroslav Glavik, who is no stranger to our microphone.
No, at all.
Okay. Miroslav, I'll start your time. You've got 5 minutes. Please proceed.
You know how I hear you? Lip reading. I try to do sign language, and this is the only thing. This is hello, something like that. So when you'll speak, make it clear.
Thank you very much, Miroslav. I'm going to ask you to provide a deputation and speak to the item that was just presented, the TTC Accessibility Report.
Hold on. One of the issues that I have with the so-called accessibility, first of all, the whole city in TTC should be 100% accessible, not the bare minimum. This is what it seems is going to happen. Nothing is TTC, take it every day. One of the issues, hold on, where is it? Staff should get trained. There is a part where they talk about the accessible blue chairs. Again, not every disability is visual. I need to be in the front where the stop announcements, so that's my father. My father is an 80-plus-year-old senior who loves taking TTC and traveling up and down left and right because it's his right to travel up and down left and right anywhere. Where's the other one? Holy crap, I need glasses. There was a symbol somewhere. Hold on, where is it? Damn it. Sorry, I lost my notes. The public education should also be about the people like me at the bottom of the scale, of the accessibility scale, but most people don't think it's an accessibility issue. TTC staff should get training, and you know that. About this, about 6 months ago, I got kicked out of the front of the bus, and driver told me to get the F out of his bus because I refused to move from the front because that's where they put the, so some sensitivity training could be included in this. The training materials, like the TTC Ride Guide, to some of my staff I work who have visual issues, the letterings is a bit too small. Larger fonts should be included. That's fully, again, 100% accessible. We shouldn't pick what disability we so-called fix or make it better. Everybody. That's all.
Miroslav, thank you. Are there any questions to the speaker? No, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Emily Daigle. Thank you, Emily. It's been some time since we last heard from you. And of course, I know you're going to speak to the Ttc Accessibility Report. The clock is on your left. I will start your time now.
I won't be able to see it, so that's okay. One quick thing, a couple of quick things. The biggest hindrance to those of us in wheelchairs and disabilities getting on the conventional system and avoiding Wheel-Trans. I don't like taking Wheel-Trans. I don't like booking my days 5 days. I don't like booking my life 5 days in advance. I will tell you an incident on driver's attitude sucks. I don't know how many of you take the regular conventional buses and have seen a bus pass by a wheelchair on their way. Or have seen driver's attitudes who say, oh, my ramp's broken, then refuse to physically deploy it even though most of the buses have the J-hooks now. I live on Lawrence Avenue east of Bellamy, okay, 1 block east of there. I live in a beautiful subsidized, fairly wheelchair accessible building. Friday night, I'm trying to come home from seeing a movie with a couple of friends at Scarborough Town Center. Unfortunately, the Bellamy dies just after 10 o'clock at night, and thank the Lord it's coming back in September, booyah. And also, after being viciously attacked in the afternoon while heading to a soup kitchen on October 16th with no results and no one caught, and the only thing I got out of that and dealing with the TTC and the police was a $46 ambulance bill. We don't take the RT if we don't have to. That's why you don't see me very much. I'm very nervous about traveling. I try to afford Go Transit when I can, but it's very difficult. And with both my local routes going to Warden Station, takes my husband 20 minutes to get to the train using the Bellamy or the 102, takes me 50. The elevators at Kennedy are severely undersized, and battling my way through the SRT and the Kennedy or to Kennedy is extremely terrifying and absolutely mind-numbing. People, when you're in a wheelchair and you're on the subway or somewhere, they have no qualms about hitting you to get you out of their way, or not getting out of your way and running in front of you onto the elevator and you not be able to get on. On average, it takes me 15 minutes to transfer between the SRT and the subway at Kennedy. But back to Friday night. I went to get on a McCowan. My husband was with me. We'd come out of the movie, put my friends on their bus to go home, and we went to wait for McCowan, 11:30 at night. McCowan bus pulls up. Driver says his ramp is broken. I ask him if he has a J-hook. He says, "Oh, what's that?" I go, "Look behind your jacket on in your little panel behind your seat. There's a strange looking thing with a piece of foam at one end that looks like a J." He claimed he couldn't find it. So I said, "Fine, please call your supervisor." Mind you, this is 11:30 at night. My husband and I are both legally blind. I'm also a woman in a wheelchair. Wheel-trans will want 4 hours notice for a ride. And that's if you can get the ride. And it's after 11 o'clock, so I can't book a ride. So I said, "Don't call your supervisor." Apparently he called the supervisor and asked his supervisor to call Wheel-Trans so I could get a ride home. He refused. The supervisor refused. They told me to call Wheel-Trans. I said, "How am I going to get a ride at 11:30 at night at Wheel-Trans?" In a very nervous situation, I had my foot just inside, just up over the ramp, because I didn't want him pulling away quickly. I've been told by TTC staff that that's the safest way to not let a bus driver take off without calling a supervisor. Well, he closed his doors on my feet. I kid you not. I didn't call an ambulance because the ambulance can't take my wheelchair. They can take me, not my wheelchair. And it's not ambulance situation. Yes, I have bruised toes for a week or two. Yes, my spasms are worse. Yes, the pain is worse because of the doors hitting my feet. But that's not worthy of going to the hospital. I have bus drivers who are on the Lawrence East and on other routes that to avoid a wheelchair, if you're standing at the stop by yourself, they see you half a block ahead, beep, 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 their little sign above their head, put the bus out of service.
Emily, just to
Bye-bye.
just to let you know, you have 20 seconds.
Yep. The biggest problem about getting people off Wheel-Trans is bus drivers' attitude on the conventional system. And the new cabs, wheelchair cabs, I can barely get in them. So I agree with this gentleman, MV1. But attitude is a big thing, and we need to change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any questions for Emily? No? Okay, thank you very much. If I can have Matt are there any other speakers to this item? No? Okay, thank you very much. Matt, if you can come back to the front of the room. I recognize that the TTC is something that many of us have big discussions on, and you will probably receive a number of questions from this committee. First from Tracy Odell.
Hello, thank you very much for the report update. I really like the way that the report was laid out. It was very clear about what was done and what wasn't done. And it's not very often you see a report coming out of any level of government where they're willing to admit they didn't quite meet a deadline or didn't quite do something when they hoped that they would do it. So commendations for transparency on that one. My question is this report based on the scaled back plan that was that 2014, 2018 plan where the TTC announced they would not be able to make all their subways accessible?
So this 2015 plan is an update on that 2014 plan. I should have mentioned this in the presentation. I guess the better news, maybe not good news, is that instead of 17 subway stations unfunded, we're now down to 13 subway stations unfunded in the 2015 budget. So I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but yes, it is an update on that 2014 plan.
Just to clarify, if I may, so that means in your progress report, it'll be based on the smaller number that you were planning to do rather than measuring it against the original larger number that you were planning to do?
Well, in the multi-year plan, we had planned to do 9 stations by 2018, and that is not changing. We still do plan to do the 9 stations. So the plan didn't necessarily didn't measure every year till 2025. Okay.
Any other questions? Terry Lynn?
I'm just wondering if you can give a little bit more information about how you decreased the no-show rate for the wheel-trans assessments?
Okay. That was actually pretty simple. We started giving people reminder phone calls.
Okay.
Like, hi, you have a interview coming up, will you still be able to make it? And that was able to help us decrease that no-show rate.
Okay. And are people able to choose the date?
I'm not too familiar with that,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
But I could get you that answer if you'd like.
All right, is that the end of your questions, Terry Lynn? Okay, thank you very much. Monica, questions?
Hi, good to see you again. The one question I have is a little clarification on the Eglinton Station build-up to remove the gap. Is that just going to be done around the elevators, or is it going to be done the entire stretch of the subway station?
The plan right now is to do it in the area around the elevator and essentially observe how that works to see if it's sufficient. Longer term, when the Eglinton Crosstown subway line is built, there is a plan to move the Eglinton subway station further north, and so that would involve rebuilding the entire platform by 2020 when the Eglinton line is open. And so when we do that, the whole platform would be at the proper height and not below where it should be.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can answer this or not because it just may not be a department that you're responsible for. The previous deputant made some allegations around the treatment of passengers on the new accessible buses, and I'm just wondering, is that something that we've heard more frequently about? Are there statistics about how the new buses and vehicles are working for the community, or is this something we're not tracking? Or how would I get that information?
Okay, our customer service department does track complaints by category, and so they would have that kind of information. I did ask for information on the ramp deployments earlier this year, actually, over the past several years. And they did tell me that the number of complaints about ramps not working had steadily decreased. And that was a result of drivers ensuring they operate them at the start of the day and making sure the maintenance crews clean them out properly. But that's not to say that this doesn't still happen. We know there are still problems with the ramps. And the hooks that the deputy mentioned aren't installed on every one of our buses yet. That will be coming soon, though. But to answer your question, yes, we can get that from our customer service department. They have statistics on this.
Any idea what I don't know if it's of a percentage, but how frequently the ramps aren't functioning properly?
I don't have that info with me today.
Fair enough.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? You want to speak to the item, or you have questions for our speaker, our city TTC staff? Okay, you hold on to that. That will give you an opportunity to speak. Questions? Tracy?
Thank you. Just going back to the reduction of people who were missing their appointments for eligibility. I had heard that some of the locations weren't very accessible in terms of having a long distance for people to go from the site where they're interviewed to out on the street, on the sidewalk. I wonder if there's a review of all those sites and, you know, the configuration of them to make sure that the sites are very user-friendly and that when, you know, the front door is close to the pavement where they go to get their ride and inside they don't have to go, you know, too far in the building.
So I don't have an answer for that one, but I'll make sure to take back that question to our Wheel-Trans staff, and we'll see what they have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions regarding the report before us? I actually have two quick questions for you. In the 2015 budget, your original 2015 budget, there was a $165 million shortfall to bring 39 outstanding stations to full accessibility. In your report today, I don't see those the numbers in such clarity. Are there still 39 stations that are not accessible?
So we have 34 stations that are now accessible, and that means there's 35 stations that still need to be completed. Most of those are funded. There's 13 that remain unfunded still. So those numbers should be in the financial impact section of the report there. But it's just the 13 that are unfunded at this time.
So we're now in the month of May, and when the budget first fell, that means that you've had some priority shifts. You've now found money to fund those inaccessible stations. So there's 13 remaining that are still unfunded and unaccounted for.
So between the 2014 and the 2015 budgets, we found the funding for 4 more of the stations. So it went down from 17 unfunded to 13 unfunded.
I'm going to ask you, where did you find that money, and can you go back and find the rest of it?
It's not me personally. I mean, our capital budgets developed with heavy consultation with city staff and our finance staff and city finance staff. So it comes out of those very complicated discussions, and it's not something I'm really party to.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more questions, thank you, Matt. Speakers to the item. Terry Lynn, I think Yin was first, Yin, and then Terry Lynn. Go ahead, Yin.
First of all, thank you very much for providing documents that are truly accessible. For the first time, a lot of your photos and graphics are described, which is really rare. So thank whoever did that. And I do want to just reiterate that when the consultation happens for the re-examining of the criteria for wheel-trans, please consider having people with diverse disabilities on there. Often the blind and partially sighted are excluded from wheel-trans service for whatever reason. I know some of us are very independent and we think we don't need wheel-trans, but that is not the same for all blind and partially sighted, especially those with dual sensory and disabilities. So just maybe make sure that the public gets, or the wider consultation happens, so it's not just ACAT, just so that we can have opportunity for input. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yin. And Terry Lynn, comments?
Just a couple of comments. I've tried to take the accessible streetcars 6 times, and I've been able to get on twice. And I know, maybe this is just a personal thing, but the old streetcars, I know that I could get on with my crutches. With the new streetcars, I can't do that because of how it's designed. And with the new streetcars, now I can only get on sometimes. So part of the issue when I've gotten on is space on the platform, but also the driver not being aware that I'm actually there to pull out the ramp, because there's not the option of going straight to the front. So that's been tricky for me. So I just wanted to flag that. The other thing I wanted to mention was that I did see that you listed accessible stops and non-accessible stops for buses. And what I find is that I can use all stops some of the time, and sometimes I can't use all stops because the driver will, even though they could potentially stop and there is enough space to let the ramp out, they'll say, oh, sorry, this stop's not accessible, you need to go to another one. And then when I did call the TTC about it, it seemed like they did concur in a sense that all stops are accessible and that sometimes drivers aren't stopping. So there was a bit of confusion there in terms of what was happening on the ground. And also, I did want to say that I don't know if this is the case anymore, so I need to make that clear as well. But I do feel that because people being assessed for wheel-trans are having trouble accessing transportation, and that's why they're going for wheel-trans, that they should be able to choose out of some dates that they can use to do their wheel-trans assessments. So I'm not sure how that plays out anymore, but I know when I did it, let's just say a long time ago, that there wasn't an option to choose a date.
Thank you very much, Terry Lynn. And are there any other speakers to the item? I'll just give a couple of quick thoughts. I recognize that there's a lot of competing needs at the City of Toronto when it comes to transportation, and especially as it comes to ensuring that our public transit system, our mass transit system, is fully accessible. I think that there has been times where council has been able to, and city staff has been able to, and TTC staff have been able to find money for projects that are priorities, whether it's the subway expansion in Scarborough, or perhaps trying to ensure that the Gardner Expressway is restored and made safe, which are not necessarily not priorities, but it's oftentimes at the expense of accessibility and the execution, the installation, and the construction of ensuring that our fleet and our service with mass transit is accessible. So the comment, Matt, that money was found, which meant that money was reallocated from perhaps some of the larger, flashier, more headlining, grabbing projects to then be redeployed to ensuring that our stations are going to be accessible is encouraging. But it also tells me that it is discretionary. So with that observation, I would encourage you to go back to the commissioners, go back to the senior staff of the TTC, and encourage them to continue to use their discretion to ensure that accessibility is not on the back burners, but something that they put on the forefront, because after all, I think we all recognize the biggest issues for those who are living with accessibility, disabilities, and a range of other needs is threefold. One is housing, one is employment, and the third, and probably the most important that I hear about all the time, is accessibility and access to public transit. And it is grossly unfair to have people pay 100% of the fare and only to receive less than 50% of the service. So with that, I will ask for a motion to receive the information report. Monica? Okay, so moved and adopted. Thank you very much, Matt. We are 7 minutes from our original stop time. And just to be clear, that when I had given my chair's report, I had said that we would extend the meeting for 2.5 hours. So hopefully everyone's still feeling good. You've got 35 minutes to go. I know that we can complete the balance of the agenda. Okay? So again, we're still in informal proceedings. Our next item is, oh, this is the fun one. The name of the committee. We get to speak on that. Oh, yes. We do have a speaker, Mr. Parker. Okay, go ahead. Mr. Parker, your clock has started.
Thank you. My name is Gerald Parker. I'm from the Institute of Canadian Justice. I'm its executive director. I'm a former member of the TTC ACAT, former regional chair of the Toronto Police Services Accessibility Committee, and the list goes on and on and on. I'm here to speak to you about what's in a name, because it's really, really important. If we were to go to the fundamental documents of our country, and that being the Charter, we would speak about negative and positive freedom, the freedom to expression, the freedom from arbitrary detainment, the freedom to safety and liberty of person, and the freedom from discrimination. Freedom to, freedom from, positive and negative freedom. It's very, very important because it colors our legislative and our legal processes, to which you are one of them. The first thing that I would say is much is in a name. Very much is in a name. But I also, before I get started, want to say, in our last meeting, we spoke of the loss of Helen Henderson and Barbara Turnbull's passing since then. So I want to give a nod to Barbara and thank her for all her work and the undying work of the 10% of us that do 90% of the work. So, with that being said, a name. In the largest city, the first province, and the last developed country in the OECD to be engaged in meaningful accessibility planning, engagement, and inclusion is really, really important. What's in a name? Well, it's a quintessential message. It's your mission statement. It's the urgency of your cause. your leadership, your priorities? Are you a committee of council? Are you a reactive or proactive? Are you reflective, timely, and inclusive? Do you lead or are forced to follow? Plan or react? Set the tone. Consulted before or after? It's all in a name. It really is. So this is about your purpose. This is about your reputation, and this is about your operational tonality. It is very important because much lip service has been given, and when I'm before Toronto Police Services 2.5 years, before a matter is brought to this committee 3 months after implementation, that's on the front pages of today's Metro News, we have to do better. So, positive freedom, freedom to safety and liberty. Negative freedom, freedom from discrimination. It's about the operational tonality, and I thank the planning department for speaking to that. Are you well-resourced? Are you engaged full-time with a dedicated accessibility coordinator? No aspersions to Benita, but we're in the largest country, or the largest city in our country, and we cannot have someone divided 3 ways to do what is more than a 1.5 times job. Benita's replacement needs to be a full-time job, and all the power to the incredible work that you've done, but we need to have a dedicated chief accessibility officer, and that is what leading municipalities are doing. So again, are you engaged? Are you being resourced? And are you being respected? And in your mission and in your name, that is reflected. Do you understand the social determinants of health, as the deputy mayor said last time around? Do you understand that in that verbiage and in that dedication and tonality of your name, you speak to that, those social determinants? Is the name in a word or in an action? Does it demand accessibilities in 2025 when 2015, when 2025 is a joke? TTC telling you that they have no money is not an excuse anymore. It's a political priority, and I say, Chair, far too much discretion. Your point's well taken, though. Does it speak to your timely engagement before or after? Are you a committee of council? Not an advisory committee. You are a committee of council. Does the name speak to your passion for change and inclusion? Does it represent the committee's transcending mandatory engagement as required under the provincial statute and based in human rights in the Charter and the inclusion of those that are made so vulnerable? Does it reflect your personal safety? The largest city, first province, last country. Does it reflect 2025 and the 2015 reality? It's 10 years away. We want what is in a name. Well, it's so much. So this is my recommendation to you. Have the committee for access to inclusion. The Toronto Committee for access to inclusion. You're not going to deny us accessibility anymore in a negative sense and discriminatory sense, but you are going to engage us in the positive freedom to inclusion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Are
Thank
there any
you.
questions to our deputy, Mr. Parker? Seeing none, are there any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, I'm going to bring this back into committee. Are there questions to staff? No? Would anyone, oh, Monica?
I just want to clarify, we are an advisory committee, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
That was a question Bernita was going to answer. So I know that there was, if I'm just going to vary the proceedings, but ever so slightly, we have had the Disabilities Issues Committee now has a stream of email discussions, I think are probably several hundred long. And this is now an item that has been discussed offline by members for some time. I will allow for more discussion. I think if discussion still needs to be had, failing seeing any other needs for discussion, I would suggest that we start moving to a vote unless there are motions to add another proposed name to our list that's before us. Seeing none, I think the way we're going to cast this vote, and just to remind people why we wanted to change the name, is that there was passion and desire from the committee to ensure that the name of this committee was going to be representative of much of what we do. There was all sorts of robust discussions about whether or not it needed to have the words accessibility in it as well, and a range of other words such as inclusion. So these are the 5 names, proposed names for the new committee that were finalized, and I'm just going to ask the clerk to put them on the screen. I am going to read them, and they are also itemized. Afterwards, I will ask you to show by hand or by verbalization your support for the name. And I will only at that point in time identify them by the number once again. So the first time I'm going to read them, number plus the title of the proposed title of the committee, and then followed by a vote based on the number. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. So, number 1, Disabilities and Accessibility Advisory Committee. I'm going to read them all first. Number 2, Disabilities and Access Advisory Committee. Number 3, Disabilities and Inclusiveness Advisory Committee. Number 4, Advisory Committee for Disability Access and Inclusion. Number 5, Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. All members who are in support of number 1, please raise your hand or verbalize your support. Okay, I would be the 1 vote. Okay, number 2, please raise your hand in support of proposed number 2. I see 1, 2 hands. Okay, moving forward. Number 3, Disabilities and Inclusiveness Advisory Committee. Please raise your hand. There was 0 votes. Number 4, Advisory Committee for Disability Access and Inclusion. 1 vote. And number 5, Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. I see 4 votes. Okay. So with that, I will ask the clerk to read the new proposed title of our committee.
The name, Madam Chair, that received the most votes is Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee.
Okay. So we have a new name for the committee. I would suggest that we all vote unanimously to support the name of this committee. So all those in favor of a unanimous vote for this new name for our committee, please raise your hand. Okay, so let it be recorded that the vote was unanimous. Thank you very much. We have a new committee name. This is good. Okay, so moving along, we now have item number 5, which has actually been before us before. I actually, with the indulgence of the committee, I actually have a motion. And this motion is simply to refer the 2015-2018 work plan summary back to the chair to be brought back to our Disabilities Issues Committee, soon to be known as the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, for discussion before the year end. And the reason I'm doing that is simply because we will have a new committee at that point in time, and I thought it'd be best that we don't commit them to a work plan from the existing committee. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, so moved and adopted. Thank you very much. And item number 6, which is actually a letter from myself, and this letter was properly introduced, and it did receive notice, and there are 2 speakers on the item. The item is regarding accessible pedestrian crossovers. Jonathan Wood and Miroslav Glavek. Jonathan Wood are you here? Okay, thank you, Jonathan. You have 5 minutes, please begin.
Thanks very much. I'm not sure what the committee has in front of them as far as the backgrounder to this deposition. Hopefully, it's the one that I submitted. If not, I'll just briefly go over it for you. So in December of 2012, I sent an email to my councillor, I'm in Ward 30, Paula Fletcher, regarding what constituted or how a crosswalk could be designated as accessible, since the majority of the crosswalks that I'm familiar with are not. Let's fast forward to a couple of months ago, and I finally received the opportunity to come before you. So you can imagine how slow that process was. But I did receive some email correspondence back, some of which related to proposed accessible crosswalks. Specifically, I live in Riverdale. This was a proposed crosswalk, accessible crosswalk, that was going to be implemented at the same time as Bridgepoint Health at the corner of Victor and Broadview. That subsequently was reneged on, I guess, at the behest of the neighborhood, who put up a fuss about too much traffic. Again, I didn't know about this, and so I was still waiting for a response from the city. Finally received an explanation to say that pedestrian crossovers do not have an APS system and cannot have an APS system, if I understand that correctly, because cars are not actually legally required to stop at those crosswalks, and therefore it is unsafe, I suppose, to put an APS system in those crosswalks. The reason I ask this is I have a legally blind son. We live in this stretch of Broadview that between Gerrard and Danforth is a 13-block, 1.3-kilometer stretch of road that has no intersections. It has 4 crosswalks. So I guess my question to the committee is why there isn't any policy in place to make crosswalks accessible for the visually impaired, and what a solution might be. And I recognize that our stretch of road might be unique in the downtown core and that there are no intersections in that stretch, but is the expectation that my son has to walk a full kilometer before he can cross the street safely? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Are there any questions to our speaker? Okay, thank you very much. Our final... Oh, sorry, Terry Lynn, I didn't see you hiding behind the monitor. No, the opportunity here is to ask questions to the deputant who appeared before us. The deputants are to speak to the item that is on the agenda. If you need to ask questions to Mr. Wood to clarify any of his comments, this would be a good time for that. And then to speak to the item is afterwards. Okay, so Monica, questions to our deputant.
My understanding is you wanted the lights at Victor? That's off?
No.
Oh.
So I live on Langley,
Okay.
which is a block north of Victor.
Okay.
There is a crosswalk at the foot of Langley and Broadview. What my response from the city was originally was that with the building of Bridgepoint Health, there was going to be an accessible crosswalk built at Victor and Broadview, and therefore, because of the proximity, there wasn't going to be one built where I had asked them to build one. Again, that crosswalk was never built.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions for our deputy, and with thanks, I thank you for bringing this item before us. Miroslav Glavik. Miroslav, the clock is on your left, and you'll be speaking to the item that's before us. Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. You're doing a good job, by the way. Thank you. You've been doing a good job at City Council for accessibility issues. Thank you. And part of the letter, you say, as we work towards building a more inclusive, accessible city, my opinion is it should be as we work towards building a fully inclusive and accessible city. You understand? The pedestrian crossings in downtown versus, let's say, Scarborough, the suburbs are completely different. In downtown, everything's put in together. In Scarborough, I don't know if you live in the suburbs, especially in Scarborough, when you go at Yonge and Dundas to go from the subway station on the southwest corner to the southeast corner, when you get to cross it's called the sidewalks, go down like this. In Scarborough, there's a little, you know when they're high in there and they're not fully accessible. So people like my father, who's low vision, has a problem telling. What I did, I work at the building where my work is. We have strips. You know the subway, that little yellow bump things at the edge of every doorway. It costs a lot of money. Making the city accessible is expensive, but it's a needed expense. You can lower the lower the sidewalks. I don't know if that's the word, and put a different format where they're the little bumps. I don't know what you want to call them, like they have in the side platform. The 401 and most provincial highways at the edge on the road and the shoulder have those little grooves that tell you you're about to go in the shoulder. A different material on the sidewalk. To make it fully accessible, you need different things. Not certain A, B, C won't work for somebody else, and there's D, E, F, and so forth. This is just an alternative. About 60% of my coworkers have some kind of visual low vision, and we made it work. Cost a lot of money, but at the end, my building, I'm proud to say, it's fully accessible. We put the strips, a little bump things that you feel when you're going, and then it's a different room, a different doorway. So yeah, doorway, and you could do that and lower the, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miroslav. Are there any questions for Miroslav? No? Seeing none, thank you very much. At this point in time, are there questions of staff from the committee on this particular item? Okay, so if I can, I just will open the floor up for statements. And if there are none, I'd like to move the motion as before us. And I just want to say quite simply is that the report around accessibility, Toronto's accessibility guidelines, and what was being asked and reported from the staff for their ongoing work speaks to the item that's before us today on the agenda, which is an item that was brought, I think, reinforced and brought to our attention by Mr. Wood. It is not necessarily different from what the staff are doing, but simply because we wanted to highlight that there was this ongoing requirement to ensure that all our infrastructure was going to be accessible and is going to be accessible. So that's why I decoupled it and inserted it into the letter, but it really is actually ongoing in terms of design and explorations by staff. If you recall, they had talked about making sure that all physical infrastructure was going to be accessible, all facilities design was going to be accessible. We try to capture as much as possible, and still things seem not to always be captured. And then at that point in time, what becomes a priority, which is why I asked whether or not the staff, if they had all the money available today, do they have the capacity to execute and to construct? And we heard their answer. So the motion is really just that, is to sort of lift it up and to highlight that this component of the work needs to be done. So the Disabilities Issues Committee, with our new name, is requesting that the General Manager of Bureau of Transportation Services provide a report to the Disabilities Issues Committee on a review of existing measures to make pedestrian crossovers accessible and recommendations to assist blind or low vision residents to cross safely and with independence at these crossings. If there's no questions of the mover, then I'd ask for a vote. Oh, there's a question? Of course, let's insert that then. So after the words, the General Manager of Transportation Services, in consultation with stakeholders, provide a report to the Disabilities Issues Committee. How's that? Okay, thank you, and thank you for the suggestion. All in favor? Please raise your hand or verbalize a yes. Okay, so that is adopted. Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. And Monica?
I just realized, and I'm sorry I didn't notice this at the beginning of the meeting, but the whole bit about future meetings isn't in here, and so do we have a date for the next meeting? Or is that all shut down now because the committee is, the formation of the new committee is going to be put in process in September?
We're going to get you an answer to that question. Yeah, so the next meeting date is Tuesday, September the 29th, and that will still be the existing members of our committee. So you're not off the hook yet.
I don't want to be off the hook.
Good, good. I want you to come back. And that, of course, that's in Committee Room 1.
Okay, I just wasn't sure because my memory tells me that we only voted for this meeting date, and we were going to move the others forward, and that's why I was just wondering.
No, I think there was some discussion at the beginning of when we were going to open up our application for recruitment.
Okay, all right.
And because this process is being managed through the city manager's office, we've been advised that it will be sort of pushed back a little bit. But I do think it's going to be a very robust and a good and open, transparent process.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of interest in joining this committee, which is great. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for your time and your contributions. Oh, yeah, actually, before you go, before we adjourn, if I can just have a quick, I will move to adopt the chair's report, just to receive the chair's report. All those in favor, please raise your hand or verbalize. That is so received and adopted. Okay, meeting concludes. Thank you very much. We don't need a vote on that. Come and give Bernita a hug, everyone.